guess what? We got some mail too.
We did.
We did. This one comes from Melissa, and I want to answer this question because this whole episode, I hope, would give Melissa some good ideas. But I want to respond specifically to some of her concerns.
Yeah.
She writes, okay, here's a question I've been struggling with as I've been planning for my 3 kids. And her kids are 3, 5, and almost 9. She says the foundational card system that we have, our Montessori planning cards, says to pick 2 cards for my 2 to 3-year-old, practical life and sensorial. This is true. She says in 1 year with my 2 to 3-year-old working on level 1, we'll only address whatever level 1 lessons, and the other 6 units are in our monthly thematic packets.
Okay.
Right? Okay. But a year's worth of theme may not cover all of the 25 reading and writing lessons.
That's true.
That is 100% true. She says, yet my 3 to 4-year-old may be ready to move on to level 2 work the next year, or would have been if I had covered the prerequisite lessons from level 1. She says, I know it's not supposed to be rigid, like, i.e., we shouldn't be covering every lesson and the lesson numbers follow the child, not the year. I don't feel the pressure to complete all of the science, humankind, or art lessons from a given level, but it does feel like I should be striving to complete all of the reading and writing and math for each level according to my child's readiness, as each level is really foundational and prerequisite to the subsequent levels.
That's also true.
Also true. She says, maybe this is my traditional education shining through, but I do feel that need to have my child be exposed to all the concepts presented in the math and reading units through level 6 at some point, as well as grammar and geometry. The other 4 units, I feel more relaxed about covering them all in lower elementary. I recognize my child may not be ready to complete all these lessons by age 9. What I don't know is how I'd even find time to present all of these lessons by age 9 for my child who is ready for them, but is limited by me and my ability to cram it all in. All while trying to balance this with group meetings outside the home, time in nature, open play, sports, extracurricular, etc. It sounds like the life of a typical homeschooler, I'll tell you.
Yep.
She says, I haven't found the magic balance yet.
There's a lot of good questions in there.
So many good questions. So what kind of advice would you give Melissa, just off the top of your head? Homeschool mom, 3 kids at home, multi-age learning is going on, but it's just all kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, no, it's really common. I mean, so a couple ideas. First off, you're absolutely right to emphasize reading and writing and math and the related subjects, grammar and geometry for the lower L, right?
For lower L especially.
Yeah. And that's because they're really first amongst equal. They are a pathway to any other learning. If you can read about any topic. If you could do math, you'll learn the computational skills, you'll learn logic and reasoning that will help you problem solve, right? So they are doorways into a wider world. And on top of that, if you're doing the constellation themes, you will cover those other subject areas, so the sciences, humankind, the arts, right? You're not going to cover them every single lesson in them, but that's okay, right? You're going to cover them well enough to give your child a really broad experience. Now, that being said, not at the stage yet.
Your child might developmentally not be ready for the sandpaper letters for quite some time, and it's okay. In fact, we say not to teach writing with the metal insets. A lot of Montessori schools will not introduce those until age 4, at the very earliest. And we have had members introduce them at age 2. And so you do you follow your child the way your child is growing and developing. But just in general, we say that sensitive age for being interested in learning how to read and write and do math, it comes later, not earlier. And that the emphasis on the practical life and sensorial, as David mentioned, is setting that groundwork. But it might take longer than you think.
Yep.
Yep.
The other thing that comes to mind is you mentioned that your child said something like, it feels like, yeah, they may be ready to move to level 2 next year. What I have it would have been if I covered the prerequisites from level 1.
Yep.
That's not the right approach.
Right.
So you don't need to complete level 1 to move to level 2. You
That's
want
right.
to follow your child and push them to whatever level is right. And this goes back to the whole like age and grade level thing that we started with in the episode. It doesn't matter if your child is 3. If they're ready to do level 2 work, give them level 2 work.
Yeah.
It's not age 4 work, it's level 2 work.
Yeah.
If your 4-year-old is not ready for level 2 work, they're still working on level 1 work and something else, that's okay too. It's not 4-year-old work, it's level 1. Everyone starts at level 1 and progresses forward. So you don't have to complete every lesson in a level before you can move forward. It's not required. What you want to make sure is that they have the underlying skills that are represented in the level. And if they could do level 2 work, then they obviously have a level of knowledge. We would say that's at the building level, the DEB system that we have. They're at a building level already and are ready to build on top of it at the next level. So just move them forward.
It's important to remember that Montessori is a spiral curriculum. So you will notice this most specifically like in our math materials where we introduce base 10 with the golden beads, we reintroduce it again with the stamp game, again with the bead frame, and then we go back to the golden beads, to teach another concept, and we can just keep using these same materials to teach the same math concepts. Why do we do this? We do it over and over and over and over, even in the sensorial area, the practical life area. Your child will be repeating the same skills and the same concepts. And it's to give children enough time over years, not, in a specific 1-year time frame, but over a long time frame to practice concepts and to, we don't really like to use the word master them, but like to have that internal mastering. It's not our analysis of the mastery, it's their self-analysis of mastery. And it comes through lots of repetition and practice. Now, here's the catch. Some children will need so much practice that they will need all of the lessons in every single level, right?
And they might need to repeat them multiple times.
They might need to repeat those lessons multiple times before they're ready to move on to the next level. And some children are going to jump.
Yep.
So we notice this with our own kids too in certain subject areas. Sometimes they would, in fact, it's not unusual at all to see kids race through specific lessons during a particular time period.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those sandpaper letters again with early reading. You've got 1 4-year-old, right? You give this child 3 sandpaper letters at a time. You're playing the what's missing game. You're playing the knock knock game with them. You're revisiting them every day. And your child looks at those 3 letters, and every time you show them, maybe it says k, and you show it to them, and they're like, I don't remember. Is it mm? Like days go by, you maybe add 1 extra letter after they've learned those 3 letters. Now you've got 4, you introduce another 3. So maybe now you've got 7, and they're just working through them so slowly, okay? Another child, same 4-year-old, you give them 3 letters, in minutes later, they've memorized all of them, right? And they're ready for another 3. You give them another 3, they've memorized all of those, and they're doing so well. You give them 5 more, and they've memorized those. And before you know it, within like 2 weeks, they've memorized the entire alphabet, right? Back to that same 4-year-old who was going so slowly. Another 6 months later, they could be doing the same thing. And then you're just like skipping through. So children do not grow and develop in a very rhythmic way.
Yeah.
In a prescriptively rhythmic way that we expect. And you mentioned already, like, it's not supposed to be rigid, but you're fighting against that nature in yourself, the expectation that your children are going to be progressing sequentially and linearly through. We talk about this often, that we expect learning to go like this, right? We expect it like you start here, and then over time, it's like a perfect little graph.
That's right.
And eventually you get up here. But actually learning looks more like this. It looks like, and then stasis for a long period, and then another jump, You know, it's just erratic. Learning is erratic, it's unpredictable, and it's per subject area. It's completely unpredictable. And
Yeah.
so in our curriculum, we give you the 6 levels for every single subject area to give you a general guideline of where you're going so that you're never at a loss for ideas for what to do, but your child's development, like, it is going to be starting, stopping, and plateauing normally. You know, so it is really important to remember that the levels 1 through 6 are not grade levels. They are not even in a Montessori classroom, even if, you know, there's ages. If there's like 1st through 3rd graders in one room, that's great. But it still should not be prescriptively per age,
Nope.
right? That's just not the way Montessori
No, I mean, we
works.
created the 6 levels
However,
to help guide homeschooling.
that's right. However, I will tell you that it is not hard to find the benchmarks for your local school district,
Sure.
especially if you live in the United States. They are all published online. We were just in Texas, and like when we worked in Texas and we were teaching in Texas, we were super familiar with the TEKS. You know, it's not hard if you know your child's going to take a STAR test in Texas in a certain grade level, or that they would take it. I don't know if it's required for homeschoolers or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We don't live in Texas anymore. But like, it's not hard to find the practice tests. It's not hard to find the standards. You want to talk about the Common Core standards, that they're not hard to find. And so you can find them, you know, if you've got an almost 9-year-old and you're worried that your child isn't on level per the public school district that you would be going to, it's something that could give you peace of mind, because Montessori, the whole curriculum of Montessori is high level. It's really high level, you know, and it's on purpose to give children who are very interested in one particular subject area a long runway, you know. But if your child isn't particularly interested in that subject, then maybe, like, you know, they kind of stop at like the basic knowledge of it, and that's fine.
Yep.
You know, we would say that's perfectly fine. What we're looking for is to children to find that spark, that joy of learning, to want to go deep in the lower elementary curriculum into one topic. And so your almost 9-year-old should be at this point starting to kind of specialize in their interest or their skills. You're probably really seeing that emerge in one way or another. You know, it might just be like, this is a kid that tends to be more interested in this kind of thing than this kind of thing. So it doesn't have to be super specific. But if you're worried about just like, are we meeting the minimum guidelines for grade levels, it's not hard to find that out. And I guarantee you, like, whatever those standards are, they're going to match to what we're doing in Montessori.
In fact, it's probably likely that the level 6 material is beyond what
way beyond,
your typical 3rd grader
for sure
would be expected to know.
For sure. And in fact, when we went to the conference in Texas, we had parents come up to our booth and they were looking through our materials and they were asking about it. And we were telling them, this is very high level, you know, so your children will learn a lot about it at any age.
Go through pre-algebra if you want.
That's right. And some of those parents that came up, they did have like maybe a 5-year-old at home. But I remember a few of them also had teens at home. And when they looked at our lessons, you know, the same lessons that we showed you earlier today from Wheel or Giant, they were like, oh yeah, my teenager would love these. And I think that really says a lot.
Well, we hear that in our community.
Yeah. So I think what I would tell you, Melissa, most of all, is to try to have some confidence, get a little more confidence in what you're doing. You're already doing a great job. You've got 3 kids. You're working through the foundational lessons, and you're doing the themes as well. Like, your children are growing and learning in leaps and bounds, and more than likely, like, they're perfectly exactly where they need to be, even if you were looking at your state benchmarks.
The goal isn't to cover the lessons. The goal is to educate the child. The lessons can be a pathway to that. They don't have to do all the lessons to be educated. Trust in your child and yourself, and you will go far.
That's right. All right.